Welcome to another episode of Roots to Health. I'm Dr. Craig Keever and my vegan chef, Amy. She's really going to be
your wife.
And my wife, yes.
You just carry your vegan chef everywhere you go.
That's right. She's actually preparing to undergo some coursework, and she'll actually have letters after her name that will prove she's a vegan chef.
That's right, outside.
She's going to take the class that's offered by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and the program is called
Food for Life.
Food for Life.
Over 20 different types of classes to teach, be able to be one of their licensed teachers.
We are very excited about this opportunity. So this particular episode today will be taking on a relatively controversial topic in some people's minds, although the whole idea of going vegan is just a controversial
my goodness. It
topic.
Comes with such identity
baggage
related to it.
But to add to that, or as part of the cause of that controversy with being vegan, is the whole idea of dairy and what does that do or not do for you. Yeah. So what we're going to try to discover or discuss during this episode is why dairy just isn't the nutritional panacea that the dairy industry wants you to think it is.
Bad stuff.
Yeah, it
I know
really,
that's controversy to even say that, but it's like that's our belief system.
well, right. And I
It's
grew
the
up.
science behind it.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up on dairy. I was an adopted child, never saw breast milk a day in my life. And I'm certain my mother, rest her soul, probably did not think to put me on a soy-based formula. So,
Well, I was not adopted, and I never saw breast milk either. So,
yeah,
it happens.
And there you have it. So, I have been on, I'm certain, cow's milk since shortly after the day I was born, until the last few years, and never really had any, major health complications from it, with one exception. I do think cow's milk is very good for cows.
Yeah, I had allergies as a baby.
And yeah,
I was on soy.
yeah. So, I mean, the issue with that is, cow's milk is made to take little baby cows and make them great big cows, right? Well, that's pretty much what it did for me. I mean, that's not the only reason I became that big, but truly, I never really had any inflammatory issues that I was aware of. I never really had any digestive problems related to that I was aware of. So I went through 58 years of my life loving ice cream. I like cheese. Okay. I was never
Cheese
quite
was
as
my vice.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Someone in my family said, if you can get off cheese, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
That's a miracle. And it's true.
And to that end, I loved a good hamburger, and very often didn't particularly care if there was cheese on it or not. But
no way. It's going to have some vegan cheese now.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, the dairy industry has done a very good job of their whole marketing ploy, like milk does a body good, and the whole series of the little milk mustache saying "got milk," all those things have just made this kind of really ingrain our culture. And I have a patient in my pediatric practice whose dad grew up in Wisconsin. Okay. And, when I started saying, things about dairy that weren't quite as flattering as he was used to, I don't think he actually took offense, but he was surprised because he grew up, and he's a man in his probably mid to late 30s. He was surprised to find out my scientific researched facts about dairy being really not very healthy for you. The dairy industry tells us that this is a great source of calcium, that there's lots of good protein in it. Well, I was watching a video the other day, and what is actually the composition of milk? Okay, and the first main composition, nutritionally speaking, is actually a sugar. Milk is a sugar drink. Now, the sugar in milk is lactose, which has two molecules hooked together. One is glucose and one is another sugar called galactose, and they're chemically bonded together. And what you'll find is that there is a large percentage of the population that is lactose intolerant. And this physician likened this that I was watching. He's a plant-based physician, Dr. Neil Barnard. Well, basically what he talked about, first of all, was that our bodies as infants generally have the proper enzymes, specifically lactase, which will break that down. But what happens to most people's bodies over time, particularly after they reach about the age of 1 or 2, they no longer have the ability to produce that enzyme, lactase, and so we become lactose intolerant, which is what happens to a large amount of people. And what he said basically, and it just clicked, it made a lot of sense, that's our bodies telling us, okay, you don't need milk anymore, let's move on.
Yeah, and I would venture to say that even if you don't have severe complications, it doesn't mean that your body's not suffering to have something like that in it.
Exactly. That's very...
It's like kind of saying you're allergic to smoke. I mean, like, who isn't allergic to smoke?
Right. So that's issue number one. Why is dairy not quite so healthy for you? Is there's a large percentage of the population that is lactose intolerant. Now, the dairy industry has countered that with providing people with, the enzyme, or I don't know exactly what's in lactate,
Okay.
but there are ways to kind of help our digestion with that. But again, the question is, Mother Nature has told our bodies, okay, we don't need that enzyme anymore. Our bodies are telling us, don't drink that stuff anymore, and we're not listening.
Well, and I go back to the point of this is not knocking at anybody at all who hasn't nursed a child, but the point is our breast milk is much lower in fat content than any other species, much less the dairy, the cow. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of, that composition is
right.
So different.
Well, and that brings me to my next point about the nutritional content of milk. And one of the light bulbs that went off in my mind, early on about, why I just needed to switch to plant-based. Our only source of saturated fat in our diet is animal-based products. And saturated fat is throughout milk. Now, again, as a younger baby, we can tolerate that probably a little better, but over time, and as we get older, saturated fat is one of the key components to the atherosclerotic plaques that develop and cause heart attacks. We don't need saturated fat,
right?
And so that's another knock, I suppose, on dairy, in that our nutritionally, our human bodies don't need any saturated fat, and regular milk and low-fat milk, even you take some of it out, it's still saturated fat.
Right. And there are minute amounts in avocado and coconut, just to be clear, just so.
Right, but those are minute amounts, and
not anywhere close.
Yeah, and so.
And the no fiber,
And the no fiber, yeah. And so then the last bit about the nutritional content of milk is the milk protein, and there is, again, a very significant percentage of the population that ends up having some form of an allergic reaction, whether it's a major one or a minor one, to milk proteins. And, I see not uncommonly babies on regular cow's milk-based formulas that come in with horrible eczema.
Yeah.
You take them off the cow's milk-based proteins and the eczema goes away, So that's our immune system on hyper alert, so... Yeah, I just to kind of hammer home the major areas about dairy that just have really, surprisingly to me, caused me to become, I suppose you could almost say, anti-dairy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just not good for us.
It's not good for us. And I mean, not to mention that there's whatever is in that cow to begin with, the antibiotics, it always makes me just kind of pause when people say that something is hormone-free. Well, no, that's a lactating cow. So to say this is hormone-free milk or this is hormone-free beef, it's like...
No doubt.
No
doubt.
Your body doesn't know how to metabolize that.
Well, and the other interesting thing I would say about calcium that I just find kind of shocking from a scientific basis is that, the United States is one of the leading countries, definitely within, I think, the top 5 in terms of dairy consumption in the world. And so to that end, if we're getting that much calcium per capita, you would think that the rates of osteoporosis in this country would be really low. And in fact, it's not just in the U.S., but all the major leading countries that have the highest rates of dairy consumption also have some of the highest rates of osteoporosis. There's some kind of disconnect there to me.
Right. And can you explain what it actually is? It's leaching calcium from the bones. As far as I've always heard that dairy somehow leaches calcium from the bones. I mean, it
I
takes
haven't
it
heard
away.
that research.
Campbell talked about it.
Okay, I missed that one.
Yeah.
So I'll have to learn that and speak on it a little later.
So leafy greens are full of calcium. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. What are the good sources of calcium? And to Amy's point, green leafies. That's the best source, and it's even more bioavailable. The other fact that I learned the other day from Dr. Barnard is even with all the milk that you drink, we only absorb about 30 to 35% of the calcium that's in there. The rest of it ends up in the toilet. As opposed to, and I don't know the exact statistics, but the absorption rate of calcium in green leafy vegetables is much higher.
You have to think that the fiber is a part of that. It's the reason that it's really, fiber is so very important for our microbiome. I can't wait for us to dive deep into microbiome because it's really the root of everything, of all health.
Very much so.
If that's not being taken care of.
Yeah. So other good sources of calcium besides green leafies, calcium is in almonds and tofu and various fortified plant milks. So those are all good sources. So now moving on to Amy's point about hormones. One of the biggest knocks that I have with the dairy industry has to do with these concentrated animal feeding operations. And whether it's to grow meat or dairy, they're both, in my mind, basically the same. Well, what happens with that? They fill these, because they're kept in such terrible conditions, they fill these animals so full of chemicals and antibiotics and hormones, and then, well, what do you mean hormones? Well, the life cycle of a dairy cow, well, first of all, let's step even further back. The normal average lifespan of a cow is about 20 years, I think, right? So what happens in these concentrating animal feeding operations is these cows are placed in these stalls and artificially inseminated. And when she gives birth, then the baby is ripped away from her and she is kept there and put on the milk machine. And these cows produce every year, just like that, for about 4 years, I hear, is the average. And that's all they do.
Yeah. Breaks my heart.
And then after about 4 years, their production starts to drop and they're taken out and slaughtered. That's a pretty cruel industry.
Yeah, male calves killed on spot.
And
I can't even,
that's right.
I can't go too far in that because it's just heartbreaking to me.
So, yeah. And so to then get back to the whole hormone issue, not only are we talking about things that are probably given to the animals, but you're also talking about in that state, that cow has been pregnant and now is not pregnant and is now producing milk. That cow is full of her own estrogen. Yeah. That estrogen is in the milk.
Right.
Okay. One of the big knocks on soy historically probably came from the meat and dairy industry, is that the phytoestrogens are a problem, creating feminization of men and whatnot. And that's a bald-faced lie. Yeah. And that's been shown to be not true, but many people still believe
it actually is. People with breast cancer actually are doing better with soy.
Exactly. The soy is a protective against many female type of cancers. And I would challenge anybody to show me somebody who's had estrogen effects from the phytoestrogens from
Right.
eating too much soy. It's just not out there for any men.
I know plastics and things like that cause those kind of things. That's a completely different phytoestrogen than what we're talking about. For
Yeah.
sure.
And then, as I mentioned, these cows are in kind of poor conditions, generally speaking, and so they get infections. And they're put on antibiotics a lot. And
As a preventative
in
in their feed.
So, and another little known fact, the dairy industry has a certain limit for what they call somatic cells. Basically, that means pus. All right. So in all of our milk and cheese is more concentrated than milk, so it's even more concentrated in cheese. We have a certain amount of pus that's allowed in our food.
Yeah, not me.
Now, it's not much, granted. In fact, I just read something from Dr. Michael Greger that in 1 cup of milk, the equivalent is about 1 drop of pus. So if you're okay with a drop of pus in your cup of milk, well, okay. I'm not.
And, the chemicals that they clean the teats and things like that, that all goes.
That's right.
You really can't filter that out.
That's right. That's very true. So, and then the other issue then too, and one that Dr. Colin Campbell brought to my awareness is, there are essentially 2 main types of protein in milk, the whey and the casein. Actually, casein is known to be a carcinogen.
Yeah.
And that's part of what Dr. Campbell's research was showing how, different levels of casein in a diet will trigger certain cancers.
You're right. Turn off and on based on the percentage.
You take it down to a low enough percentage and it turns it off.
And it had almost like a cocaine effect as far as to the brain, as far as what casein, haven't we all tasted something and we just felt a little euphoric afterwards? That's what it is. And also, I will say, not to belabor that, but, on a plant-based diet, I can go really, truly hours without getting hungry. On the standard diet, I could, every 2 to 3 hours, I had to have something because that addictive quality in the foods made me sick to my stomach unless I could just, so it's wild how that works.
Next area of interest that I have in the whole dairy industry and the issues I have with it, it has to do with the impact on the environment. I was shocked to learn in my class on plant-based nutrition through Cornell University that, think about this fact, 50% of all the waterways in the country do not support aquatic life. That's an astounding number to me, 50%. Now, what does that mean? Well, and what is that from? So in large part, I won't say all of it because there's nothing 100%, but in large part, the runoff from these concentrated animal feeding operations, whether it be for growing meat or dairy, the runoff gets into the water table. And with that runoff comes an algae bloom. We've all seen them on different ponds and whatnot. Well, once the algae dies, it sinks to the bottom. The bacteria take over. When the bacteria take over, they munch up all the oxygen. And guess what? No oxygen in the water, no aquatic life. And that is evidenced by a dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi. You can Google that, and there's a large dead zone there that continues to grow regularly every year. And there's just no aquatic life there. And in large
I know
part,
we're not talking about fish today, but it's like our seas are literally
That's right.
off. Yeah.
So, yeah, and in large part, that's due to all these huge animal operations that's draining into our water table.
Yeah.
So,
Not to mention everything it takes to feed it, to,
well, exactly. And as a for instance, one of the statistics that's given to me here is it takes about 1,000 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of milk. All right. I don't know exactly what it takes to make a gallon of plant-based milk, but I'm going to guess it's less than 1,000.
I know they've compared it, and I don't know this either, but with grain, how much it takes to make grain. You would think crops would take a lot of rain, but not anything compared to being able to keep those alive and at that level.
And I know that people not in the plant-based world have poo-pooed this idea about methane, but those large amounts of cattle do produce methane.
No pun intended.
Right. They do produce methane, which is a greenhouse gas. And, you know, I would need to take a deeper dive on the science behind that before I could talk intellectually about that. But I think it's certainly an issue that science has brought up as something we do need to be paying attention to.
Right.
So.
Right. Absolutely.
So what are our alternatives to dairy? And I am really happy, and I've mentioned a little bit about that, but, you know, the plant-based milks, there's a number of them. And my favorite in terms of taste, personally, is the oat milk.
By far.
By far. Now, having said all of that, certainly the oat milks, depending on which brand you buy and how it's made, there are certainly some processed things in that. There's some oils and, you know, things. We haven't yet really delved into the idea of making our own.
I haven't found that I like it that much, but I have a recipe that I'm going to try. However, with the creamers, I'm pretty stuck on that creamer. And, you know, here's the thing. If you're letting it in everywhere, if you're letting those oils in everywhere, then you've got problems. But that's literally the only oil I could think about us letting in.
Yeah.
You know, occasionally we'll have a vegan butter if we have, you know, like a weeknight or a weekend kind of thing. But I don't worry about
And again, our butter that we usually get is from oat milk.
vegan butter. Yeah.
Yeah, vegan oat milk.
Miyoko, if anybody needs to, you know, again, I know it's got some oils in it, but sometimes you need just a little bit of a pick-me-up.
Yeah, you know.
Tastes so good.
It is very nice, you know. But other forms that most people are probably aware of plant-based milks include almond milk, soy milk, cashew milk. And I never thought about this much until in the last year or two, but pea milk is another very good one.
Yep.
And the reason I bring that up is, you know, toddlers between the age of 1 and 2 really do need an increased fat content of their milk. And so for those that are plant-based, soy works very well. And again, to reiterate, the phytoestrogens in soy do not cause any estrogenizing effect on boys or girls. They're protective. But if you'd rather not do soy milk, or the baby doesn't take to soy milk very well, or whatever reason, pea milk is another good alternative. Those are the two that I know of for kids between ages 1 and 2 because of the protein and fat content. Those are good substitutes for dairy. So.
Yeah, and I'm going to be playing around with some fun things like pistachio milk and some, you know, cashew milk and doing some different things with some sorbets that I'm excited about.
Well, and
sunflower milk.
The other thing I would say about substitutes for dairy, not just the milks, but, you know, probably, I'm going to guess 20 years ago or more, you put the words vegan and cheese together and you had nothing that was very tasty.
Yeah.
However, in recent years, there are a number of companies that are now making very tasty vegan cheeses.
And, you know, the thing I like is you don't really want it to be as decadent as you used to have, because remember how you feel after a meal like that? So I do like that they are hearty, that they have depth to them, but they don't make me feel miserable.
Right.
You know, so I think that's kind of, there's your sign.
Yeah, there's your sign. And now, you know, if you're struggling with insulin resistance, these are things that we have to pay attention to in terms of, because these things are going to be a little higher in fat content. I think we mentioned that coconuts have saturated fat. I think coconut is often a part of some of these things, whether it's coconut oil or milk or whatever. So there is some saturated fat that can come in with some of that. So you do have to pay attention to that, particularly if you're struggling with certain health issues.
Yep.
And
that's what I like about Food for Life classes that I'm going to be teaching, because they'll be geared towards, if you're looking at helping with cancer, if you're looking at, this class is for more diabetes, this is more for heart health, this is more for, you know, so depending on how you need to tweak that, that'll be very beneficial for people to kind of learn, because it's a lot to learn.
There's a lot, yes. Well, in closing, I suppose kind of a recap, you know, I would again say I find myself kind of surprised to be a bit anti-dairy at this stage of my life, and it really has come down really from an actual scientific kind of and personal experience of the problems with dairy in the diet.
It to me, and this can't be weighed, but to me, and I've heard several plant-based doctors say, it is the most inflammatory thing you could put on your body. And I think cheese would definitely win that case because you're adding so much more to the cheese than just, the regular milk. So sodium, all kinds of stuff.
Well, and just like the transition from standard American diet to a plant-based diet, my first reaction to that was from my health perspective. Okay, that's the only reason I did this. If I wouldn't have been recognizing that I was a heart attack waiting to happen, I wouldn't have done this. But that has then blossomed to looking at all the reasons behind a need to switch to plant-based. And as we talked about a little bit ago, the two other main issues, particularly in relation to large animal feeding operations, are going to be not only the animal ethics, but the environment. Those two issues together, combined with my health, really form kind of a pretty solid reason. There's just no reason to go to it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you throw in the fact that in the plant-based world, the nutritional value of what we're getting far exceeds what we were getting before.
Right.
Feel
like a slug.
You don't feel like a slug. You don't get all this gunk, and I can tell you that after nearly 5 years of doing this, not only am I 100 pounds lighter and feel so much better, but all these factors point together to just keep me moving in the same direction.
Yeah, and to me, it's like I go back to the fact that I've always been told kind of that this mystery, like this heart attack just hopped up on somebody. We don't know how it came out of the blue. And that used to scare me, so much. I lost a brother to a heart attack at 47. And lots of cholesterol issues and blood pressure issues in my family. And my dad was adopted, so I didn't really know part of my history. But it's just amazing how it doesn't work that way. If you can, it's so hopeful, and that's what I wish people could come away. Open up your mind if you can, and realize that it's not maybe the vegan options or the vegan idea of what you thought, it is, and just be open to this cuisine and let it be able to be a healer for your body. There's so many hopeful things that can come from it. And that's my mission, is to be able to cook things that can, introduce people first to the food and go, okay, I wouldn't have eaten that normally because I don't like that vegan. One of the chefs I was listening to today said, oh, you don't like that guacamole stuff? You don't like that? You're against, if you say you're against veganism, you're against strawberries. We can so block our minds. Your mom did a lot of vegan options and you didn't know it. She might have put some butter in it, but but you grew up on a lot more of it than you realize.
You bet. Well, as always, we'll welcome comments and any ideas you want to further have us further expand on, or points of contention. Always willing to talk about any of these issues, and would like to hear from you all if you want to. So we'll close out this episode for now, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care.
Thank you.